Right, so welcome everyone, and welcome to this fourth event in the Swedish Chamber's virtual discussion series on Emerging Stronger. Originally, this series was actually called Emerging Stronger on the Other Side, but then one of the previous sessions, one of the panelists rightly pointed out what other side and of what. And this series has now been running for exactly a year and was sort of introduced out of the ashes of the first fire of the pandemic. And whilst the UK was still very much in its first lockdown. At that point, when initiating this series, we felt a strong need to focus on all the lessons, all the innovations, and all the structural changes that the pandemic could offer us. As a complement, I think, to all the negativity around us at the time, and some which is still there. Emerging Stronger is a platform for discussion, and we are thrilled that it lives on in this format even today. Now in the UK, as we were just talking about, I'm proud and very pleased to say that as of Monday, we can finally hug again, not just hug, but at the pub. And if that's not a step towards the new normal, then count me out. With the pandemic, we've had to change the way we live, the way we work, the way we do business, the way we operate, and fundamentally so. For some businesses, the future came early, and we've seen some online providers, for example, experiencing the dawning of a new era for their products or their services, whilst some were hopelessly left behind and unprepared. And this is sort of what we're here to discuss today. Does it really take a pandemic for us to fuel innovation the way we have in the last year? And to our aid, we have an exciting lineup of C-suite speakers from Spotify, Vodafone, and Telia. Now, very, very briefly, for those of you who are completely new to the Swedish Chamber in the UK, welcome. We're a business platform and a community. We were founded in London in 1906. By business, for business, and we connect Swedish and British businesses and entrepreneurs with stakeholders in the community. We offer a soft power platform, activities, meeting places, training courses, accelerator programs, and so on. And so do many of our partnering chambers in different markets. And in fact, we're very pleased to welcome the Swedish chambers in France, Latvia, the Netherlands, and Switzerland with us today, as well as the Stockholm, Jönköping, and the East Swedish Chambers of Commerce. And finally, also the British Chamber of Commerce in Stockholm. So a virtual bonjour and guten tag to all of you who are dialing in today. Now, before I hand over to our host, Nik Gowing, I'd like to extend a special thanks to our series sponsor, Handelsbanken, and to our partner, Thinking the Unthinkable. And now, please welcome our host, Nik Gowing. Those of you who have followed this series before are very familiar with him. He's director and founder of Thinking the Unthinkable, former BBC World News anchor, and Nik, amongst many, many other things. So we're very excited to be working with you again, and over to you.
Thank you, thank you, Peter. And of course, when I created this project of Thinking the Unthinkable in 2014, the unthinkables had begun to happen, but nothing like on the scale of what we've endured, particularly in the last 15 months, and what we're going to endure in the future with the climate emergency as well. Let me just emphasize to what Peter has said. This is about a conversation. Wherever you are watching us, quite apart from the three panelists, we'd like to hear from you. So please don't sit on your hands. Get going now. If you've got points to make or points to pick up, I've got a grid here, and we've got a system here for getting the questions to me. So make sure on the Q&A that you post as early as you can. We want you to be part of the conversation, and I'll obviously have to read out the questions, but feel that you are part of the conversation right from the get-go. So we've got 55 minutes. It'll be a hard stop at the top of the hour. And what I'd like to do is get each of the speakers to introduce themselves. Katarina, you're joining us from Stockholm. What is your responsibility at Spotify?
Thank you, Nik. So my responsibility is, my first love is HR. I'm a behaviorist, so I oversee HR, so I'm the CHRO of Spotify, but I also have GVS, which is everything from real estate to design and build out. I also oversee the company strategy operations.
Rachel, you're joining us as well from Sweden, from Stockholm.
Indeed, I'm Chief External Affairs, Governance and Trust Officer here at Telia Company, so overseeing the group's risk management, ethics and compliance, sustainability, communications, and public affairs and part of the security functions. So all things external that could go wrong, might go wrong, hopefully don't go wrong, that have nothing to do with the actual sort of commercial part of the business. And to add, perhaps spent the first 6 months of this pandemic at another Swedish mobile and cable company called Millicom, operating only in emerging markets. I've seen the pandemic from two very different sides, actually.
And I see you also have internal audit functions. You have
yes,
a very...
although that reports to the audit committee, technically, but yes, that sits within the broader remit as well.
You certainly have a modest number of responsibilities, if I may say. And Johan, you're joining us from another part of little Sweden, almost, Marylebone in central London.
Thank you, Nick. Yes, my name is Johan Weiberg. I am the Chief Technical Officer of Vodafone. Vodafone is also an operator like Telia. We are one of the larger operators in the world with special focus on Europe and Africa, providing connectivity, fixed mobile. And as the Chief Technology Officer for Vodafone, I'm responsible for our technology, the networks, the IT systems, digital, etc.
Great, thank you very much, all three of you. And already the first questions are coming in, which is great. But let me just underscore what we're talking about. Does it really take a pandemic to accelerate innovation? I would suggest that's already slightly old-fashioned. Does it really take some kind of crisis? After all, look what we're facing with the climate emergency to accelerate innovation. And I'm simplifying things very easily here, but to say we've probably seen 12 years change in 12 months, the last 12 months. What we want to do is find out how your companies and how you personally and those around you have responded, how you've risen to the occasion, and also maybe the challenges you faced and the maybe failings or failures or experimented, it didn't work out. Rachel, what kind of experience have you had? Just some headline points for the moment, please.
Well, I would say that there are probably sort of three buckets, I think, that really summarize the entire pandemic period. And just to your question first, do we need a pandemic to accelerate innovation? I think innovation is happening all the time. The question is, what are we innovating for? I think what the pandemic has done is perhaps accelerated innovation for specific problem solving. But I think that's how the world works. For those of us who worked very much in emerging markets, there's a lot of innovation happening locally to solve local problems. We might just not be as aware of them elsewhere. So I think it's a question of what is needed at a given moment in time. And I think what's more been spurred by the pandemic is adaption of new ways of living, working, taking innovation to heart. It's more the adaption rate of it rather than the innovation itself, perhaps. But I think our experience and sort of learnings and challenges, I think I said three buckets. One is really about work. Like everyone else, work has shifted from being physical to remote, and especially in our sector, of course, having to maintain business, maintain the networks, keep on rolling out networks in an environment where shops, retail was no longer possible, where there's restrictions to what technicians can go out and do. That's one part of it. Then, of course, the second part is the consumer demand that we've had to adjust to in terms of actually catering for our consumers in a whole different environment. And then finally, it's a question of then adapting also the workforce very much. How do we keep a company together? The culture as well as the new set of skills needed to actually take care of these new demands. So I think those have been the three headlines for us, and I think probably very many other companies. And really the biggest, I wouldn't say failures, but challenges, which I'm sure resonates also with other sectors and everyone on the line here today, is how do you keep employees engaged, and how do you keep the culture that you want in an environment where you are physically distant and yet demanding more of your staff?
Let me put the words agility and nimbleness, which can underpin what all of you are going to be talking about. And already I've got questions coming in. Katarina, of course, Spotify, you are new to the market in so many ways, and you are very digital. But how have you adapted? And not just because of the pandemic, but because of the dramatic changes in so many areas.
Yeah, I think we as I usually say that, we live in controlled chaos and we live in a very, very...
Would you really call it chaos? Would you really call it chaos?
Yes, and we want it to be like that too. And I think all of that also prepared us in a very good way for creativity and innovation, but also when the pandemic or the crisis hit, I think we were all prepared, no matter if we talk about the crisis management team, but all the employees. I think that is the way that we do work, but it's controlled chaos, right? It's not just chaotic. And
yeah, but I'm sure others are asking themselves, what does she mean by chaos? Yeah. I can look at a dictionary definition, but is that actually just an easy thing to say over a glass of beer? But actually, it's very organized in its own way.
It is organized in that way that we have decided long ago that we don't want to have a lot of over-engineered kind of processes. Everything is not like described in a policy or in a template, and it's training our people to be very open-minded and have the purpose and the direction at heart, and work within what I would call a mental framing or a mental paddock. But within that and in between different individuals or teams or functions or units, it's going to be much of trust built, kind of relationship collaboration. So back to your question, I think, you know, what really the last 12 or 13 months have learned us is that we accelerate when it comes to kind of the triage of people, place, and technology, and all these things have learned us to accelerate of how can we work when it comes to context and also complexity, but also all the things that we need to improve, not in the way that we did before, but in a totally different way, so that connectivity is there in a new way, in a new frame, and a new setup.
Well, just before I go to Johan, Rachel, I have to ask you, you've only been in Telia for 6 months. Did you actually go there because you were attracted by a degree of organized chaos? Is that the way you describe Telia or not?
No, I did not go there for the organized chaos, although I do get what Katarina is saying. Telia, of course, is in the Nordics and the Baltics, and at this time, especially in hopefully soon post-pandemic environment more than anything, is an incredibly exciting opportunity. It's the most digitally connected region in the world, with a company that spans countries that are really at the forefront of living that digital life, but also still with challenges ahead of how do we manage to do so sustainably for the long term, and how do we?
No, I just want to establish it wasn't chaos when you arrived.
It wasn't.
All right, and it isn't now. Okay, Johan, do you have chaos in Vodafone? Would you call it organized chaos?
No, we don't really. We may have portions of it depending on which areas. A lot of the things that is providing infrastructure, you don't really want chaos in that. But there are areas that are more around product development, new things, where we have more of an organized chaos, actually. But if I come back to your main topic regarding if we need a pandemic or not to accelerate innovation, I think, personally, I think the answer is no, but it really helps. It really, really helps. And if I look on us as Vodafone, we were quite used to working remotely since we are spread in a lot of countries, and we had something like 3,500 rooms with video conference equipment in the normal working rooms, and everyone was using the laptops to connect, etc. Hence, we moved the whole company to work from home in more or less 2 weeks without any major problems. However, we spent a lot of time with customers in helping them make the transition. And I think generally we saw that the big organizations, they were more prepared and had it easy to do, while some of the governments, healthcare, and also smaller companies needed much, much more support. And we probably seen a significantly faster evolution of some of the sectors that were behind, that had huge things to catch up. And then I think it will probably be easier from a technical viewpoint to get some of these things to happen than for the human beings to adopt. I think we have run people hard the last year.
But what about nimbleness and agility? What have you seen about the mindset and the capacity of every generation, maybe some of them not, within Vodafone to adapt? Not just because you said you're going to be working from home, but actually the way they rethink, the way they rethought the way they work, and also contributing maybe new ideas.
Yeah. I mean, just to put things in context, we had about a 70% traffic growth in some of the countries happening over just over a couple of weeks. I mean, we did an enormous amount of capacity emergency expansions to not make the networks fall down. To make that happen is we cut away a lot of normal things from the agenda and did things that were taken 6 months in normal cases and got them done in a few weeks. So you could see really when people understand that, oh, this is so important, this needs to get done now, then people go directly, they go the straight line to get the things done. You take away the various decision approvals, etc. And you take away the non-important stuff and you just get it done. So I've been impressed generally by people, how they have been responding. I mean, we have a big network operation center in some of the countries to run these huge networks. And now we have about 1,000 people sitting in the living room operating the networks from the TV instead.
And has that endured though, Johan? Has that spirit of getting 6 years work done in a few weeks?
When we do the people surveys, it is surprisingly how well it has gone. The spirit is really, really high. Even though you can see now at the end that during the spring, people is getting tired. I think everyone has worked really hard. We measure on statistics on the length of meetings and when people start working in the morning and end in the evenings, that people are putting in a lot of long hours. So I think we all need a little bit of what was said before by Peter, going to the pub, get some sunshine and work a little bit less.
And maybe getting a hug. Katarina, you were nodding furiously with Johan's remarks.
Yeah, I think what we have seen, especially if you look to what you can read up externally, that all the people that had a very traditional, maybe also conservative, maybe very old school kind of view that when you have people not working in the office, that productivity and efficiency would go down. I think that has been proven wrong in all locations, in all organizations, for sure. And that is a worry. And I think that is a new thing. And I think that comes to the point that Johan is driving. When you were either in quarantine or you were in lockdown or you were, working from home, you need purpose. And one of the things that actually bring you purpose is to do a good job. So the hours became much longer. So we have seen, and I think most companies have seen that too, productivity and efficiency has gone up. If there was one manager that thought that there wasn't trust or we couldn't do this, he or she or they have now, proved that that is totally wrong. I think what we also see in the service and in the conversation and dialogue with all our people is this. It is more the lack of sense of belonging, community, and that social tissue and that glue and the energy you get from whiteboarding together, collaborating in the same room and coming together, and what researchers call the third room, that we lack that, we miss that, we long for that to come together. So yes, people are tired, and I think most companies that are dare to be open and transparent feel that very closeness to burnout. That doesn't have to do with being pushed, but just, people are tired or depressed and mental.
Let me just emphasize that the word in the title is innovation.
Yeah.
In the end, you can still get satisfied even if you're working ferociously hard with the fact that you've innovated. If Johan, you're saying there was a 70% increase in traffic, presumably with a concomitant increase in revenue, has it been the same, Rachel, for you at Telia with revenue?
No, I think all operators have seen increase in traffic, but of course, depending on where you're based and your various revenue streams, there is a difference also, your loss of revenue from roaming, from people traveling, everyone being static and using technology in a different way, as well as for those who have media income, loss of advertising revenue because sports went away, events went away, and people didn't want to spend money on advertising the same way. So it's been a bit of a mixed bag, I would say, from that perspective. But of course, at the same time, there's been fantastic innovation that might drive future revenue streams that perhaps weren't taken up the same way. Telia, for example, Crowd Insights was a product, if you like, that existed already before the pandemic. but wasn't widely known. It was then taken up by municipalities to help them looking at travel patterns, where people adhering to travel restrictions. It's anonymized aggregate data to see how people move. And now, of course, that's something that people look at and say, well, we can use this for so many other good purposes, for city planning, events planning, etc. So, it's a bit of a mixed bag, I would say.
A question to all of you: is this going to endure? Even if, as three of you have said, people are tired, I'd use the word weary as a kind of weariness, as opposed to you can still be you can be tired but still invigorated by the enormity of the challenge and the luck of having still a job. But what about how much of this has become embedded in different thinking? That's what we're talking about with innovation, because I've chaired several things where there has been pressure and worry from chief executives where they said, actually, there are a lot of people who said, let's hope it goes back to the way it was. But I don't think that can be seen as reality, whether it be the pandemic or what is coming down the track on the climate emergency, which is going to have even more seismic impact on people's way of life and the way society works. What's your view, Johan?
Well, I actually think there is a risk on new innovation, new creativity. I think when people are meeting together in a conference room or they're meeting in the pub after work, and you sit and discuss, or you meet at the coffee machine and you talk about things, etc. That interaction and many people interacting together around the problem, etc. I think that has created a lot of innovations. Some of the US companies I work with, they also bring this up. And
is it going to endure? Is it going to endure?
I'm concerned that if we would only be in this digital environment, I think some of it still works. There are some tools to help it, but I think that could be on a negative side. And I think going forward, I think many companies argue that they will have a split policy. You work a couple of days from home and a couple of days in the office, and you try to get the more creative session group meetings to be in the office and more of working by yourself when you are at home. And I think that's probably the answer. Where it's going to land in the end is going to be something around that.
Rachel, you were nodding agreement there.
Yes, I think just as innovation is a clear buzzword coming out of the pandemic, I think hybrid is another one that we'll be hearing a lot more from. Hybrid working environment, a mix of work from home and in person, hybrid, teamwork, you take people from different teams to drive that creativity more. I absolutely agree with Johan that you do not have the same sort of spurring of ideas sitting digitally, even with the best of digital tools where you can do, post-it notes on the screen. It's not the same as being around a table and a whiteboard and just let the ideas flow. So I think, hybrid connected with innovation is probably what's going to be our future.
But do you feel positive about that? In other words, there isn't damage to a model. There's a reinforcement. There's innovation of the way you're working.
I think there is a genuine, certainly as we see from our surveys in younger generations, there is a genuine want to build back better, as some people say, and we call it reinvent better, right? To really take the best of what we've learned from the pandemic and say, let's really use this and try and do things better and more sustainable also going forward. So I'm an eternal optimist. So, but that's definitely a trend that we see.
Even in your organized chaos, Katarina, can you say the same?
Yeah, for sure. And this is why we don't have a vision and we don't talk about it. We launched our program, Working From Anywhere program, 2 months ago, and we used the last 12 months to rebuild all our offices. We decided and we asked all our people what works for you and how would you like work to look like when we are able to come back in an open and more safe society. And 65% said that we want to come back to the office, but with the flexibility and the freedom of choose a bit more, in what suits my phase in life and also in a weekly basis. So it's more quiet places now in the office. It's more collaborative, more creative, and more innovative spaces. And it's designed in a way now that we think that more of the home, the things that really is comfortable in the home, where we brought the office home when we were forced to go home, will now enter the office and vice versa. And we think people will come in for more socializing, where they came in to do work. And we have really stressed the fact that work is not a place you come to. Work is something that you do, and then giving all our people a choice between two, and they just fulfill that application if what they choose, and it came out 65% would like to come into the office, but not necessarily every day, all 5 days. But we say that we are a distributed first company as soon as we come back, and instead of just debating it and not using the time when people are out of the office, we just decided to rebuild them for that purpose.
All right, well, look, let me pick up on some points coming in, picking up on exactly what you've just been saying. Let's nail this and then move on. Ian Lilly from Essity saying data shows that most people in the UK have continued with work from home as their norm. Could we be overemphasizing the shift in working practice that has occurred, or will we see more polarization between industries and types of work? Johan, Rachel, Katarina, who'd like to jump in on that? Rachel, you're on mute. Rachel?
Katarina, you go.
Okay, so being a behaviorist, I would say that we are all, creatures of habits. So I don't think it's going to go overnight, but it is the era of everybody's rethinking, recharging, reshuffling, reorganizing, redesigning, and I think that is what we're going to see.
Our habits changing? Are habits changing comfortably?
Not overnight, and not in that drastic way that nobody wants to come into the office. I think everybody wants to feel a real true sense of belonging. I think they want to put that kind of mental club blazer on. They want to feel a difference, even if Telia is a great company to work for and Vodafone is also. What is the difference, and what team do I belong to? So no, I don't think, the companies that said it's like we're going to be so modern now, and nobody wants to come in, and we're closing down our offices. I dare to say that no, that is not what we see as a change. I think it's going to be a mix. If it's a hybrid, or if it's, a flexibility and freedom, I think what we have learned the last 13 months that can't go away is that we can trust our people to do the work no matter where they are.
Right, of course, all of you are coming from well-capitalized liquid companies, and obviously a lot of other companies are suffering very badly, including SMEs particularly, and those who are self-employed. So let's remember them as well, away from your corporate life. Rachel, what's your view, particularly as you have responsibility on sustainability and ethics in particular?
I mean, we've actually spent quite a lot of time focusing on SMEs specifically during the pandemic, helping them become what we call more digital. So under an actual specific program to do so, exactly because they suddenly needed to shift and maybe didn't know how to shift from running small enterprises and needed to learn everything from how do you do sales online, how do you use cloud storage, etc., etc. So I do think there is a shift there, but I fully agree with Katarina that, aside from the large corporates where perhaps it's easier to allow or apply this flexibility at an earlier stage, I do think individuals also are rethinking and as Katarina said, recharging, how do they want to live their life? So even if you are an SME with now technology, with the digital opportunities that there are, I think that individuals will also choose to create their own hybrid workspace to the extent that it's possible.
What is a hybrid workspace?
Where you do allow yourself to maybe not say, I will go to that office Monday till Friday from 9 till 5 or whatever it means, but where you do allow to learn enough digital skills to let your business become digital enough that you can run some of it from your living room. Even in the smallest of spaces, we see this. Innovation is incredible. People are running businesses from, what used to be Facebook's being invented in dorm rooms. That is now a norm for SMEs across the world from small.
But of course, there are casualties as well.
There are, absolutely. Digital is not, or technology is not the solution to everything. And then there are many, many jobs that are still incredibly manual and that need labor. Even the Vodafones and the Telias of this world can't solve for everything. And I don't think that that's the intention either, but we can certainly try and make more labor work, whether that's mining or other big industrial, safer, and allow them to use technology to be smarter in how they operate and therefore become more sustainable, but also not just from an environmental perspective, but also revenue sustainable and actually continue operations in a way that maybe before the pandemic we hadn't thought of.
Let me just see if there are any negatives here. This from Leslie Clark of Heartland. Are you worried about how creativity can occur in the digital community with work from anywhere? I think you've all partially answered that, but she's more or less saying, are you worried? Johan?
Slight. I think it's good to always be worried about things and just pay attention. I think Ian was right that it's been overemphasis. First, it was everything in the office, then what everything is going to be at home, and we will end up in this hybrid environment we all have said. And I think it's been really good to drive innovation. I was reading an article in the Times this morning regarding parent-teachers meetings and how people were happy to do that on Zoom instead of going and been waiting and trying to get to teach at the right time slots, and teachers not making it, and then parents not getting the chance to talk to the teachers, etc., etc. So I think it's changing the way you're working things. I think we need to pay attention when we end up in the hybrid environment, because it's easy when everyone is in the office or everyone is at home. The hybrid environment is harder to make to work. And I think we should pay attention on how we create the innovation, especially if you have permanent people not being in the workplace, so permanently working away. And we need to make sure we have the right type of tooling, support, remembering, etc., and then create sessions when people are in the office. But there we should be a little bit worried.
But what about the fact that actually you tend to gravitate to people you know already, or people you're in touch with by email? You're not widening the circle of people you need to know. I haven't picked up a visit card for 16 months, for example. You can't do that digitally like this. But that is picked up by Eva Gannett from Pro Services. Heard on a Spotify podcast, a company replaced water cooler meetings with randomized one-to-one meetings, randomly pairing employees across the firm each time. Do you think this could stimulate innovation and science of belonging when working from home? In other words, I guess, Katarina, the idea of walking into a lift, or an elevator, I should say, or meeting someone in the car park or the bike shed, or when you're hanging up your wet weather gear or something, you bump into people and you're conscious of things you hear by second or third hand, and that's missing in a big way at the moment.
Yeah, that's true. So one of the things, worried about innovation in the short run, we haven't seen that there is any signs that innovation has gone down during this year. I think we launched more markets. We have launched more new products and services, more new shows, all that, but that is short term. So I don't think we should overemphasize what we have learned during the last 3 or 13 months. I think if it's more about mental health, I would say, that we are worrying about, and creativity and innovation is a very big part of that. And also,
do you have any data on that? Do you have any numbers? Do you have any scaling on that? In other words, could you put a figure on the number of people who really have been, my word, not theirs, suffering?
I would say everybody has been suffering in different ways, because I think everybody has been touched and also lost people and couldn't really mourn, and all the things that we are used to do in a ritual way, we couldn't do. And then I think a lot of people that are single household, I think the people that suffered the most, which is a lot of people at Spotify, single household that didn't meet their friends, their colleagues, their moms, their dads, they live in a very small place. And back to that water cooler kind of roulette that we use now when we have random meetings, it is the people that has never ever joined a company before, that has their first job coming in, don't know anything about networking. These are the people, which for us is like maybe 30% of all our employees that are joining being in hypergrowth. So for them to have a systemized way to bump in and meet people randomly is as important as back to who are suffering the most. It's single house. It's not the parents, even if they've been struggling with house schooling and all that, but they at least meet and bump into people in their family and have that social connectivity.
Let me pick up on that. How do you innovate effectively, toss around ideas, be maverick and so on, with people you've never met, you don't even know really exist, but they actually have a position in the company? How have you resolved this, Rachel and Johan? Rachel first.
So it does require a bit of orchestration, but I think we are all social human beings. And I think therefore, as time went by, I think it naturally became something we started looking at. And I'm sure, Katarina and many of her peers in the HR community looked at that. Like, how do we make people connect? Just one example.
Let me be clear. Can you be sociable talking like this? In other words, with people you've never even physically met in the WC or whatever.
No, a very concrete example is, first of all, Telia is a great example. We have a CEO who started in May last year. Half of the management team started between May and December. Some of the executive team we have never yet physically met, believe it or not. But that has simply not been possible because we are based in different countries and due to the restrictions. But more specifically, just a few weeks ago, we had the extended leadership team together digitally. And as part of the program, we organized a walk and talk, and you get paired up with someone that you don't necessarily normally work with. I certainly was on a walk and talk. On my phone, you go out for a little fresh air and speak to someone that you have not previously spoken to. And yes, it is possible, but it does take some orchestration. We have purple lunches, purple coffees, as we call them, where we do allow people to team up and speak to colleagues, get to know colleagues, whether that's 15 minutes, half an hour. And I do think that the willingness is there now that time has gone by and people really miss that interaction. No, it's not perfect. It's not the same as sitting in the cafe, but it is better than not. And I think that is helping drive an orchestration of actually more structured socializing.
Johan, what have you done in Vodafone?
I would like to separate between socializing and talking to people and innovation, because I think we're mixing them here. And from my viewpoint, I don't think I have met fewer people the last year than what I did the year before. On the contrary, it's much more efficient. So I have time to meet a lot more people, and they can be in any country and also be partners we're dealing with, because you don't need to waste time on traveling, etc. So I actually think that I have talked to much more people, or somewhat more people than what I usually do. Now, I wouldn't put that with creating innovation, and because I think there are other things required. And I think for me, more innovation comes much more from discussing problems and how to solve them, and what we can do that. And also it can be, if you are used as a company to work with video conferencing, if you have a problem and you pull together a cross-functional team in that discussion, you can actually find better solutions. And of course, in the old way, you drag people together in a conference room, and you maybe or maybe not, you got the right people in that conference room. It may actually be easier in the digital environment to drag together a cross-functional team that are really knowledgeable on that area and have a cross-functional discussion and maybe find a good solution. So I want to keep these two things apart, social and innovation.
How much have you found, even you have been tested as, as a senior executive, working out how to overcome what you can see as negatives or things which are clearly not working? How much has this tested you?
It's boring being at home all the time, I find it. It's bloody boring. And yeah, worked very long days, very, very long weeks. On the other hand, we have gotten so much done. I was summarizing to myself all the things we've been able to achieve, and it's an enormous list of things.
More than you would have done otherwise, do you think?
Yeah, it could well have been, because the team has worked really, really hard, very long hours, and due to the pandemic, we increased the ambition on things we needed to do to both handle the situation and then compensate on things. So overall, that has been fine. But there have been days where you feel like, oh, I'm going to go out and puke soon because I get so tired sitting in front of the computer, and you get tired on doing things, and you don't get the variety. I had a very strange experience on Monday evening. First time in 14 months, I had a business dinner in a restaurant inside. And it was a very strange experience because it was a long time ago, but I loved it. It was very nice.
Have you suffered the same thing or experienced the same things, Katarina and Rachel?
I think one of the biggest learnings that we had is that actually working from home and being 100% distributed and not necessarily only like 80% distributed like before, being in all time zones and having so many offices and having people around, is that it has democratized meetings, meaning everybody on screen. It's easy to chime in and have a conversation when everybody is on a screen, instead of having a cluster of people in Stockholm, a cluster of people in New York, and then a person in Malaysia or one person in Hong Kong. It was very hard for them to get in at the right point in the meeting. So I think that there are a couple of things that we will bring back when we actually do get into the office, that people should actually be on screen one by one, because listening. The other thing is, what we have seen in the tools that we used to work and some that we added now during this year, is that we can work much better, and the development with the tools to work asynchronized is so much better. So when people are asleep and then get up and start to work, that you can actually work in a collaborative document so much better than before, and you don't have to have people stay up or get up super early because they happen to be in Sydney or in LA. So a lot of things has also taken off the pressure and democratized, and a lot of things works really much better. But all our physical offerings had to go digital or virtual overnight. But those intro days and finally have those Swedish fikas that we have all over the place, and where we just come together and socialize and have a cup of coffee and have that cinnamon roll or bun. We kept them, but we now have them digitally, and that has been important to get people to remind that they need to relax, they need to get off screen, they need to get out and do the walks and talks, they need to do things off screen, and to really also mark in colors where they don't have to sit in front of the computer, where they can take a call in their ears, or where they don't necessarily need to take notes. Then they can be out walking if that was permitted in that.
Let me pick up. We've got about 18 minutes to run. Rachel, is there an issue here of how much people, maybe from a certain generation who don't naturally think this way, are having to discipline themselves much more, realizing they've got to deal with adversity, and that doesn't come easy to them?
I absolutely think there is. I think that varies greatly also between regions of the world. If I compare and contrast my first 6 months of pure crisis management in one part of the world with then the other half of the pandemic being this part of the world, I think all the younger staff, colleagues that we have certainly have had to deal with adversity in a way that they have never seen before, and I don't any of us had seen. But I think there is a different level of mental exhaustion with that, in that in the emerging market it was more about survival, right? And that survival actually spurred a level of energy that's unprecedented. I think one of the big takeaways for me has been the dedication and the commitment of that generation, certainly not just to survive, but to ensure that everyone could stay connected. And so I think the room for feeling the adversity and the need for discipline there was less of that. Whereas I think this part of the world, where the reality is that you have more, there's more that's provided for, it hit harder, and that discipline has been much more needed, because that sort of sense of adversity was a very new phenomenon. And I think especially the youngsters that have come in, where this is their first job, where they have started during the pandemic, it's a challenge where I think we've all have had and have a responsibility to take extra care of every single employee to help them overcome that adversity.
Now, look, we've got about 15 minutes to run. Can I ask you to underpin your next thoughts, not least with what's coming down the track with the climate emergency, which John Kerry for the Biden administration is saying we're nowhere close to thinking about what really needs to happen. I'm putting that to you because there'll have to be innovation because of the impact on work, on our lifestyle, from what is coming down the track existentially because of the climate emergency. So it's not just the pandemic. The pandemic was, if you like, opening the doors to understanding the way to actually deal with this level of adversity. So can I ask you to think about that, because we'd like to look forward, but the forward outlook is not as rosy as just ending or bringing under control the pandemic. And I'm just wondering what your feelings would be, because I've got a couple of questions here which I'd like to put to you at this stage. This from Steve van der Park from Skanska. How have expectations by customers and clients changed during the pandemic? And what do you think their expectations are now? Johan?
I mean, I think there was a difference between the crisis situation. I mean, we had the companies coming in on the Friday afternoon, like NHS, and saying we need the call center up and running by Monday morning. And then people work like crazy all weekend to fix it. And I think overall, I think the whole world is changing. So we are expecting to have a digital experience, which I think is just good. And I think there's a lot of industries that have been behind that just need to speed up. I mean, I think here in the UK, NHS has done a lot of things in the last 12 months that have been very beneficial. And I think that needs to go on. If we then look forward on your climate agenda, which I think is absolutely key, I think many of the things we have used during the pandemic will be tools that we also will use to solve some of the climate problems we have going forward. Less travel and you do video conferencing instead, etc. It says that the communications industry can impact maybe up to 15-20% of the world's CO2 emissions due to changing how various business processes are being done. So I think there are a lot of learnings from the pandemic that we need to use in the coming years.
Let me pick up, Katarina. Are you already thinking about things which still need to be done, well beyond just getting through the current crisis of the last 16 months? In other words, thinking not just 16 years, but maybe 16 weeks. This could happen very quickly.
Yeah, I think everybody needs to do that. If this pandemic learned or taught us anything, is that you have to prepare, and even in a fast-moving, an environment like where we find ourselves at Spotify, I think you have to plan. And then what you also then have to do is iterate on that plan. So you can be thinking about a lot of plans that are, 16 weeks or even, 16 years ahead. But back to that chaos where we started off, that is actually helping us being on our toes and trying to iterate other things and tweak on the things and be very nimble, as agile as one could be when it comes to everything from business plans to shipping new products on our platform.
And Rachel, again, someone else has actually just reinforced that question I put. There's no name here, but let me just read it to you. The pandemic has forced companies to invest in innovation to survive, and we've seen it is possible to change industries in less than a year. Do you think this quick change of operations ever will happen to prevent or at least cope with climate change, which we should call a climate emergency, and other global issues to the same extent companies have taken action to stay profitable during COVID? In other words, are there more shocks coming, which probably some at the top of some companies and some organizations are hoping against hope won't really be relevant? What do you think, Rachel?
Well, Nik, I wish I could say that, yes, we have learned and we will now put in more concerted efforts globally to indeed tackle climate change. I fear, though, at the same time, as the pandemic showed, that only when it's literally in front of you, in your face, the real action is taken. I mean, let's not forget Bill Gates' now infamous TED Talk in 2015, warning that the world was not ready for a pandemic. And look what happened. Even when he said it, no one was really, quite frankly, willing to listen and prepare for that.
And he also says, as part of his new book, before his recent challenges from Melinda and so on, that actually you can have vaccination for COVID, but you can't have vaccination for a climate emergency.
Correct. You can't. And unfortunately, I wish we could. I think there is a moving trend, certainly in the whole ESG investor sphere, in academia, of course, with the US coming back on the scene when it comes to climate issues, that it's at least a little bit higher up on the agenda. I think there is a recognition that this is a bigger crisis to deal with. But I fear that the problem is, as with so many things, with politicians involved in the short-sightedness and the life cycle of what they need to achieve and want to achieve, it is still sadly seen as too far out for many to really put the resources to today.
But that's a huge challenge to mindset and culture, isn't it?
It is. Absolutely. And education and responsibility on the media and so many actors that need to come together to have.
Yeah, but it's about bringing this to the attention of your C-suite, your chief executive, and also your board. They've got to have a different approach.
I agree. I think, I mean, I'm very fortunate to work for a company where that needs no convincing, but I think that, you know, we're in a part of the world also where that has been on the agenda in a very different way. And of course, now we must be careful, and we can't sit here and say it's for everyone else still to do it. There are parts of the world where again, back to the argument of survival, this perhaps is not top of the agenda when there are other big societal issues to address first.
But they all come together. It's an issue of national security as well. Katarina, I saw you nodding energetically when Rachel was speaking.
Yeah, but it's nice to hear. And I think, you know, all the companies that are doing well need to do even more. And it's easy to sometimes, I think, drop this from the agenda because there are other things that are pressing. But I think, you know, we all have a responsibility when it comes to sustainability, and I think also becoming a true global citizen as a company and what that means. And that is so entwined to not just the things that we used to think about that has to do with climate. Today, I think it's entwined to the way that we look into diversity, inclusion, and belonging, but also social impact. So it has so many things and moving things, which makes it also interesting and also very important. And here I think the customers will vote with their feet, so to speak. And I think that will be important no matter who you are, including, you know, societies or governments. And so maybe people don't feel that it is just, you know, in front of us. I think that will be the next thing that everybody debates and trying to figure out how to do. And still, I hope, but I also like to think that it's not too late, but it's a pressing thing for all of us. And of course, especially if you think about the generations to come.
All right, I've got 7 more minutes. So if you're out there and you've still got a question or you're burning to ask it, please send it to me. I can still fit it in. There's an anonymous question here for you, I think, Johan. Is innovation better or more efficient, a bigger focus during crises compared to when they are not a crisis? And I was interested that Rachel actually did use the word crisis for what we've been through. Johan.
Yeah, I don't know if I have a good answer on that. I think from some context it is, because never waste a good crisis to change things. And I think it's easier to make a change when you have a crisis. So whether it's it was not a known innovation before, just something that pops up, I think it's easier to get it implemented and make it happen when you have a crisis. And of course, the problem you have when you have a crisis is that if the innovation comes up in another area during the crisis, it may probably be down prioritized. It won't happen. So I think there's a little bit of both in there.
Let me ask you all, do you actually have maverick voices, maverick thinkers? And maverick could be retranslated into visionary as well. Do you have pressure from the next generation? Are you feeling that? Has that become more evident in the way you've had to deal in the last few months? Rachel?
I wouldn't say it's pressure from the next generation. I think maybe I'm just very fortunate to work now, and having worked previously in companies where there are mavericks and where we're always challenging each other and ourselves.
Do you accommodate mavericks? Do you feel comfortable with mavericks?
Absolutely. I think they are.
Many don't.
I think they add to you know, to the mindset, to the thinking. That doesn't mean that every idea is necessarily a good idea, but I think we certainly need them to indeed allow ourselves to innovate.
Katarina?
I think it's part of our DNA, and I think it starts at the top. And we are fortunate enough to have a founder and a CEO that I would say maybe could be mentioned as the head maverick in the organization.
He's maverick in chief, isn't he?
Exactly.
There's a question here from Ayenyo. How has the pandemic impacted R&D capital allocation, Johan?
Yeah, we did some more allocation of capital to the short-term crisis areas, immediate capacity expansions, etc. And then I think now we see that we actually announced yesterday an increase in capital spendings with €500 million in the coming year, because two big reasons. I mean, one would we think it's a excellent opportunity right now, growth opportunity in the market due to all the things we have discussed. We think there's a huge need with customers around digitalization, and that's an opportunity we want to take. And the second thing is the 750 billion euros of EU's rescue funds to get Europe going, which we also think will drive a lot of changes. So going forward, we're actually allocating more, and we believe there's going to be more opportunities. At least that's what we are betting on.
So if we were to be meeting again, all three of you, in say a year's time, and we were to be looking again, does it really take a pandemic or maybe the climate to accelerate in innovation? What do you think our report back would be in about a year's time? Rachel?
I think that we would agree that, or certainly I as I said at the outset, I believe it certainly takes that to spur the adaption of new innovations. I do believe that innovation is going on all the time, but innovation for specific problem solving and adaption definitely has been spurred by the pandemic.
What about the role of people in all of this? Because with machine learning algorithms and so on, much work is eventually going to be replaced, probably not in 10 years, but in much shorter time frame. Quickly on that.
Well, I do think that that's absolutely true to a degree, but I also think that the people, you know, the people's minds are needed to come up with the solutions and understanding the challenges to begin with. That won't be replaced by machines.
Katarina?
No, experience, emotional work, and the connectivity will not be replaced, but all the things that we might also think is repetitive and also a bit tedious will maybe replace and will help us. So I'm not really scared about that, but I think how we will define, because I think that is important. How do we actually define? I'm not really sure if everybody on this call is defining innovation the same way. And I don't think we don't necessarily need a crisis or a pandemic for innovation, but maybe to accelerate it. And I think the pandemic has accelerated a lot of things.
Does it stimulate? Does it stimulate as well? Not just accelerate, but stimulate?
I don't think so. I per se, I don't think so. I think it was a lot of things that what we got help with was explaining the why. And when people were having their backs against the wall, it was like, okay, I'm not going to argue. We're just going to change our behavior. We're just going to use these new tools. We're just going to do this. We're just going to shift these things. So I think it helped a lot with the communication that is always very hard. People don't necessarily have to agree on your decision. They don't even have to like it, but they have to understand it. And now everybody understood why we did things.
Johan, final thought. What do you think it'll be in a year's time? I mean, it's a hypothetical, of course, but when you think where we were a year ago and where we've had to get to in the last year, you know, things are moving unthinkably fast.
I hope I'm wrong, but I'm worried that the change in the coming 12 months will be less than what we have had in the last 12 months, because people say, oh, the pandemic is over. Now I can go back to the normal situation. I hope I'm wrong. We need to work so that it doesn't happen, but I am concerned that that will be the case.
Do you fear they could actually be distressed, almost cold turkey, a feeling we've been through a crisis and actually it hasn't got any better, even though we've sort of come out of it?
I'm not sure about that. Maybe,
okay.
Maybe not.
All right. Well, look, I think we've got through almost all the questions. There is one point here, again, anonymous. Bloomberg came out with an article highlighting that junior employees are losing out with working from home. It's not as easy to network internally and externally, nor getting noticed by your superiors to advance your career. On the other hand, seniors enjoy working from home, spending more time with family, having already advanced their career. Do you recognize that quickly, Rachel? And Katarina's already nodding, so I know her answer. I think, Rachel, I can see you nodding, so I know your answer. Johan, are you nodding too? You're on mute.
I don't have any data to support either opinion, so I just keep quiet.
All right. Well, I think an emotional hug to all of you. We can do that now in the United Kingdom. Thank you very much indeed, Katarina, Rachel, and Johan. And Peter, over to you.
Thank you, and thanks for a great conversation. I can hear Rachel quoting someone saying how only when it's in your face you'll actually see change. And to your point, hopefully that's not the case for our battle against climate change, but as there rightfully is no vaccine against it. Also, I think Katarina's comment on corporates becoming true global citizens is fascinating, as we've seen in the US, for example, and perhaps that's a great topic for an upcoming Emerging Stronger discussion. Now again, thanks to our fantastic speakers, Katarina, Rachel, Johan, and not the least our wonderful host, Nik Gowing. Thanks to our sponsor, Handelsbanken. Thanks to our partners, Thinking the Unthinkable, and the partnering chambers across Europe. And finally, huge thanks to all of you for joining us and participating in the conversation. The next Emerging Stronger event will be in September. Hope you can join us then. Until then, take care.